Welcome to the Durham Energy Institute. Before I get around to introducing the speakers, just a little bit of housekeeping. A fire alarm is not anticipated, so if one goes off, it's the real thing. You can exit through the top door, but more likely we'll exit through the lower door here and walk down the stairs and meet in front of this cylindrical building. Probably cover us on the health and safety. Do be careful when you up and downstairs. Anyway, it gives me great pleasure to welcome two friends and colleagues to present tonight. I'm not sure we've had a double act before, so we'll see how that goes. You know, I was tempted, but I've only got the one hand to do this as a charade until Lynn told me that won't come through on the connections through to our online audience. You'll be able to hear us and see us. Pop your questions in the chat, and when it comes to the end of the talk, then they will be answered. And the reason I was thinking of doing it as charades is because normally we just do a lecture, but actually this is we'll do it anyway. Sorry, I'm lying. You don't get to see this bit, but it's. Maybe not. But we'll see. So it's lovely to welcome both Adrian Green and Sandra Bell today. They will be talking about coal stories, which says it all. Just to introduce both Adrian and Sandra, I've known Sandra more or less since the day I walked through the university door back in 2009. And shortly thereafter, we found ourselves working together on a cross-disciplinary project on carbon capture and storage, anthropology plus earth sciences. It was very innovative and quite hard work to try and understand the different research methods. Well, it was for me, but for Sandra, she spent a career working as a social and environmental anthropologist across that divide. And many of the really great work we've gone on to do in the Energy Institute has stemmed from the anthropology component. So in the audience today, we've got Charlotte Adams from the Coal Authority, who came up with this idea of using mine water heat. The technical stuff, forgive me, Charlotte, the technical stuff is very straightforward, but it really took off when Charlotte talked to the former mining communities who said, you mean we could reassemble those fractured communities around a common low carbon source to give us warmth and so on? Yes. And so we found that we're in the rather unusual but fortunate position of society pulling us towards them rather than us saying, this is good for you. Adrian, I've known for a little less time, but if anyone can capture phenomenal stories, it's Adrian. His interest is a historian, and his interest doesn't just span energy, but spans time as well, from the medieval up through the Industrial Revolution, hinting at the present day, and the way in which energy, particularly in the home, has influenced the development of society. So who better than Adrian and Sandra to present this talk today? Who's the first act?
Thank you for coming, all of you, today, and thank you for the people on the webinar. I think you pronounced it. I pronounced the webinar today. Anyway, those people out there, I'm not sure you can actually see us, but thank you for being there. And of course, one of the challenges about giving this lecture is this is quite a little book. It's only 40 pages because it's meant to carry with you on a walk. And well, we thought it's not very sensible to actually reiterate the contents of the book, because I'm sure some of you have already got one, would like to get one, which you could do at the end of the lecture. So we didn't want wanted to give away what was in them, too much of what was in the book either. So we decided that we would talk about the illustrations in the book, and that will give us a chance to say a little bit more than appears in the text here. But first I should say something about how the book emerged from really discussions about education, because there's a lot of ideas spoken about how learning could be taken out of the academy, could be taken out of the schools, could be taken out of the libraries, and that the world around us and each unique place should be viewed as an immediate, accessible to the resource for learning. And Durham, of course, is particularly well placed to be able to do this with its amazing amount of recorded history and its striking buildings. And there were lots of ways, of course, to use locality as a vehicle for learning. But one of the most obvious and effective, I think, is just to go out and look and discover what a place has to tell you. First, though, I think you do need a little bit of guidance as to what sort of things to look for. And in the case of the built environment, once you've been given some idea of how to look, then it can become second nature to do so again as a source of instant entertainment and information. So these kind of ideas led to the introduction of taking students on walking trails in Durham City. And in Adrian's case, they were history students, and in mine, they were studying for a master's degree in energy and society. And as we know, most Durham students come from elsewhere, and their education might be considered dolefully incomplete, in our view, if they fail to realise their surroundings were once at the heart of the 18th and 19th century transition to a fossil fuel economy, one, of course, that we are now trying to transform. So gradually it seemed word got about around the walks, and my efforts became known as the Whole Walk and started to be joined by university staff and was included in an event at an international conference. And the feedback was, to me anyway, surprisingly positive, gratifying, positive. And even long-standing residents expressed surprise at the extent of the city bus bill passed, especially when they were learning about the mines, the coating ovens, the ironworks, and all those things within a stone's throw of Durham Marketplace. A process of selective amnesia had surrounded evidence for the working class and commercial history of the city. This history is being overlooked in favour of a kind of medieval narrative, more marketable and supportive of Durham's status as a university and a cathedral city, which of course Bill Bryson so famously eulogised and promoted. But there were many other layers of history in the city. And for these reasons, colleagues and friends pressed for our walks to become a book. The DEI offered some sponsorship, followed by the Durham City Trust. And our luck continued with a great good fortune of discovering a local graphic designer called Christina Ulrich. And really the look and feel of the book, which is meant to feel nice in the hand and feel usable, we owe it definitely to her. I should say thanks also to Frances Key, who's here today, for her 2 pen and ink illustrations, which we'll be looking at a bit more later on. We made the decision for the profits on any sales of the book to go to the Durham Mines Museum in the town hall at Spennymoor, and they would then, for the time being, also take charge of the sales and reprinting and organising those things. So everything was settled, and the book appeared last summer, but of course its launch is only being celebrated today because, like so many other things, it was delayed. So, not wanting to spoil anyone's enjoyment of what can be discovered in the book by reiterating its contents, we're going to look at some of the illustrations and tell us what more they can have to say for us. So here we have, I don't know how many of you have actually done the walk and been and seen any of these things, but geology provided a great gift to the guide by bringing coal right up to the surface and into the hands of the walkers. This photograph, which is taken just on the south side of Credens Bridge, is there in the book to make sure that walkers don't miss the chance to touch the coal beneath that overhanging ledge, which is a tangible reminder of coal's presence in the city. The instruction in the book is to get down and rope around till you find the coal. And I was told by one person who's here today not to use this word rope. Oh, why not? Anyway, I've looked it up and it's a venerable word. It appears in Beowulf, so I can't. Although subsequent events made me wonder if I should reconsider. Anyway, once you find the coal, you really have this tangible, felt experience of how there really was coal produced in the middle of Durham City, right near Credens Bridge. There was also signs there of early mine workings that are clearly evidenced in what looks like a block entrance to a tunnel. You can't see it in the summer, it's usually overgrown, but you can always see it quite clearly in the winter. A plan of Durham City for 1820 shows that there were two pits above the riverbank that matched this location. So we can assume that these workings existed prior to 1820. There's good reason to think that the block archway is the entrance to a tunnel that led to a pit known as Flintoft's Engine, which was situated on nearby Quarryheads Lane. That mine was in and out of use for almost 100 years, from being sunk in 1720 to its final abandonment in around 1816. The name suggests that Flintoft's used steam power, they call them fire engines actually. They used steam power to pump water from the pit, employing a new mechanism that was patented in 1705 by a Cornish mining engineer called Thomas Newcomen. And Newcomen's engine was greatly improved upon and then widely adopted, making it possible to excavate deep mines and reach previously unattainable coal seams, which is what happened at Durham Elbit. This is a photograph of Elbit Colliery. It was taken in the 1890s by the Durham photographer Fred Morgan, and it was kindly provided to us by Michael Richardson with his marvellous Gilesgate archive, which is a huge treasure. And we used some other pictures that he kindly gave to us as well. Now, we chose this picture because it shows so clearly the colliery's proximity to the cathedral, which is something that would be inconceivable in modern eyes. The photograph appears to be taken from the slopes of Elbit Hill, where we are near where we are now, where much of the university's contemporary campus is now located. And when the extension to the university's library was built in 2012, 3 mining shafts had to be filled in and packed before they could proceed with the building. The first deep shaft at Elbit Colliery was sunk in 1828 on land leased from the dean and chapter of the cathedral, who got immensely rich out of such procedures all across the county. They became the richest diocese in the country. And there was a second shaft known as South Engine Pit, which was sunk in 1858. And like the other early pits in Elbit's production was intended for domestic and local industries It was what was known as land sale coal, on which no tax had to be paid, and that was unlike the coal that was taken by river and sea to London, which was known as sea scale coal. Within the city boundaries, there were many other mines as well being excavated at this time. Downriver at Fram Lake, a pit is recorded being sunk in 1815, and this eventually became part of the system that developed to include 4 shafts, a suite of coking ovens, and brickwork. And a pit at Sidegate, close to called on the west bank of the river, was also sunk around 1815. There was mining towards the east of the city, close to the river at Keepia, but it's difficult to piece together the details of the activities in this location because there were several pits that existed under the name of Keepia. There's enough evidence anyway to show that between 1818 and 1822, a pit was sunk in a place called Blue Garth, close to the Sunderland Road. Now, this length of time, 4 years to establish a mine, was not uncommon. The first pit at Framlingate reportedly took 3 years, and the necessary high levels of investment were very risky, especially when profits relied on local land sale markets. But with the development of the railways in the 1880s, came opportunities to enter the more profitable export market because it became so much easier to move heavy, dirty coal around. So the city's existing collieries at this time received further investment, and the new ones were created at Old Durham towards Shoecliff and at Akeley Heads. And at Akeley Heads, this was the last city mine to produce coal when it ceased production as late as 1949. Now, we chose to reproduce this front cover of a publication from 1843. Because although it doesn't relate to Durham City specifically, its cover page is so eloquent about the tenor of the times and the struggle in which all collieries were engaged. The 1840s were particularly turbulent decade as industrial expansion and the development of the railways proceeded alongside agitation for social and constitutional reform. So pamphlets and tracts like these were major media for political discourse. They were the sort of social media of the day in the 19th century. There was a ready market. Jane B. Thompson, the fugitive author of this document, signs himself as a coal viewer, and he was one of many newly literate voices educated in the chapels, the Sunday schools, and the emergent mechanics institutes. Despite the title, though, Thompson is not producing a how-to handbook for the pitman's trade. Its 15 pages are divided into 3 sections. The first, and you can sort of track them, I think, if you look at that. The first rehearses cogent arguments for colliers to unionise. The second lays out detailed evidence of the fatally hazardous working conditions endured by miners, and the third section forms the text for a carefully worded petition to Parliament or the reference. The opening section reads as a secular sermon addressed to the colliers of Pine and Weir, urging them to improve their lives by combining. It employs passion and reason to plead with the colliers to join the newly formed Miners' Association of Great Britain, which Thompson refers to as the Great Union. This federated union was formed a year earlier in an attempt to overcome the fragmentary tendencies of unionism in the coalfield, which for decades waxed and waned, come and gone as temporary expedients for very particular ends and over very particular issues. The activists realised that their best hope lay in founding an enduring organisation of local lodges federated within a union, run by an executive body appointed by delegates, hence a democratically organised, permanent organisation. This was to take a generation to achieve, and we can't yet trace, as we can't trace the real J.B. Thompson, we don't know if he lived to see it. In showing, as he says, the necessity of the colliers uniting to protect their labour from the iron hand of oppression, Thompson denounces first the current 20% cut in wages that they were facing at the time, and that had occurred since the partially successful strikes of the previous decade. Two, the invidious fines inflicted by the coal owners' agents that eradicated earnings after stroke. There was lots of controversial arguments about the weight, or whether it should be weight, or whether it should be how full the tubs of coal were that came up from the mine. There was arguments about how much stone was in them, whether they should be levelled off, all these things that the coal owners manipulated to use to their advantage, so they could fine the miners for not having produced the right amount in exactly the right way, and so on. And the miner could end up losing most of their wages for that fine. And then, of course, there was the long-standing grievance that related to the annual finding. At this point in time, particularly, the coal owners were manipulating this annual contract that had to be signed by the miners. This was a kind of hangover from agricultural employment, where agricultural labourers were hired annually, sometimes 6 monthly, on contracts that found them and could work that particular farmer. And this model has been transferred to the coal mines, but the coal owners figured out how to use it to their advantage, and at this time they had left large numbers of colliers without contracts of employment, forcing them to accept work on a casual basis whenever they were needed for lower wages than their colleagues. So they were employing this sort of dividable tactic as well. But Thompson doesn't think the union was essential only for better pay and security work. He thought the union vital to halting the sore neglect of safety measures in the mines, which, as they had become deeper, were inherently much more dangerous. Thompson calls for the establishment of an inspector of mines, similar to that which had been introduced in the burgeoning factories. The introduction of the Mines Act in 1842, so that's the year before this, had created an inspectorate, but it consisted of a single inspector who gloried in the name of Hugh Seymour Trenenere. Trenenere he only had powers over employment regulation. He had no powers over enforcing safety in the mines. That had to wait to a second act in 1850, when all of 4 inspectors were appointed for the whole of the mining industry in Britain, which around this time employed more than 200,000 men and boys. Thompson offers a long and shocking tally of misfortunes, as he calls them, in the form of fatalities through explosions and other accidents in Tyne and Wear from 1756 to 1843, which he calculated the number over 1,500. That's fatality. And he remarks, no doubt truthfully, that these were the officially recorded numbers and therefore likely to have been underestimated. And finally, Thompson proposes his petition to Parliament, requesting a select committee of inquiry and the appointment of a special commission to investigate conditions in the mines. Now, we don't know what happened to this petition. However, a petition calling for identical measures and drawing on similar evidence, though worded slightly differently, was presented to the House of Commons in August 1843. And this petition, with its 21,000 signatures, was known as the Pitman's Appeal, and it was sponsored in Parliament by a Tory MP, actually, a badly called Tory, he's known as, called Thomas Duncan, who really was a friend of the miners. So Thompson's petition, as it's found in this document, we think was a likely forerunner of Lee's shadow, the one that was put forward a few months later. Now, as I say, we haven't been able to find out much about Thompson, even despite the help of a great genealogist who's been assisting me, called Colin Gott. I hope he's out there listening today. We did try very hard, and we concluded that Thompson may have been using a pseudonym. And it was very common for miners who were agitated for unionism to be blacklisted and working in the pits by the coal owners or their agents. And so he would have had good reason to hide his true identity. He does give us a little clue about himself, though, because you can see that he gives this locality of Savik in Monk's Rimmer, where we think he likely worked in the Pendleton Main collieries. But more so is Thompson's connection to Chartism, the movement for constitutional reform and universal male suffrage, which was growing force in the coal field in this period. And we know this because the printer publishers, Williams and Morrison, of Bishop Weir, that's on the other back of the Weir. Now this is undoubtedly James Williamson, who, with his fellow Chartist George Binns, founded the Sunderland Chartist Association, together with a bookshop which became the centre for radical activity in the town. In 1839, when insurrection flared across the country after Parliament rejected the first Chartist petition, Williams and Binns were sentenced to 6 months in Durham jail for sedition. And they were accused of organising illegal meetings and publishing seditious handbills. No doubt this would have been included in that if it had been published at the time, but it's a little bit later, but he was obviously churning them out. Their arrest was sparked by incidents surrounding a huge Chartist meeting at Sunderland. Miners from Thornley, Paswell and South Hetton had rounded up their colleagues and hijacked trains and engine drivers on the Durham to Sunderland line to take them to the meeting. And some even secured a ride home at the end of the night. The black sheet of this insurrection provoked outrage among the authorities, for which the pair paid the price. Our doughty printer was not undeterred from issuing seditious literature, with the Collier's Guide published 3 years later, and neither did it prevent him from pursuing a political career. By 1858, he was a successful newspaper editor and proprietor of the Sunderland Times. He gained further respectability as a local town councillor and he campaigned for temperance, the abolition of bridge tolls, and improved sanitation in Sunderland. So he became a kind of pillar of society. And there is still a street in Sunderland that is named after him. So we thought this, by using this illustration, we were offering a kind of onion, you know, that you could peel back and find all these different aspects of mining history. Thank you, I just really hand you over, Aidan.
Yes, I'll continue, okay? Good. So it's been a great pleasure to work with Sandra. We didn't know each other that well before we did this. And it's really been amusing of 2 minds, I would say. And the nice thing was, whenever one of us had a better idea, we both said, oh yeah, let's do that. So really been a great pleasure. I'm just going to go through a few more of the images in the book, and like Sandra, take some of what lies behind those images a bit further. This is quite a famous image of children working in mines and relates directly to what Sandra was just speaking about. This photograph of the Durham Union Workhouse, which shows the infirmary building, I wanted to include in this lecture because what's really striking about that whole complex, as you know it, at St Margaret's, which has a health centre, with the dentist in that building as elderly and children's care facilities, is the continuity in the built environment. It started off life as a poor-law union workhouse, and it's still in use for welfare purposes. And what I find doing research generally on buildings is, in England, as Patrick Wright famously said, we live in an old country. The continuity that lies behind so many of the uses of buildings today is really quite striking. Next slide. We chose this image for the cover because it's so wonderfully evocative of the change that did take place in Durham City in the 19th century. And as Sandra has emphasised, there's this astonishing ability to look at Durham heritage and overlook the working class aspect of the city, despite the fact that the housing legacy is still very much all around us, particularly in the viaduct area. So it's this fantastic image of the construction of the viaduct. But I just wanted to emphasise what Durham was like before coal mining came to the city in a large scale, because Durham really was a very important legal centre. Between the closure of the monastery in 1536 and the opening of the university in 1836, law was Durham's main purpose. So many of the buildings around Palace Green were law courts, and Durham had its own chancery court in the name of the bishop, which meant that anybody living in the county of Durham could sue somebody else for redress in the court of chancery. And the American historian Neff, who wrote an important book in 1932, The Rise of the British Coal Industry, Neff says that Durham Chancery Court was very, very important to the emergence of the North East coal industry, because anybody with mines in County Durham could pursue issues of law through Durham's courts. And that was about rights of way, often about pollution, particularly the salt cans of shields, or where people had damages as a result of livestock falling into old mine workings. And all of this, the Chancery Court was so flexible, the Chancellor sat in judgment on these issues of equity of fairness. And of course, there was no pre-existing body of law for the coal trade. So when it first gets going in Queen's reign in the 17th century and the 18th century, Durham's courts were really central to what came about north of Durham City. At that time, there had been very few hobbyists within the city. Most people would be craftsmen, artisans, often we know from their wills and inventories with a small farm and livestock. Surrounding people on the hill in the middle, who were coal owners, the clergy, and the lawyers. A man called Angerstein, who was a Swedish industrial tourist, visited Durham in July 1754. And Angerstein was fascinated by all the industry in the North East. He records the salt pans and thatched fields, he records the wagon ways around the Durham and so forth. When he comes to Durham, he writes, Durham is very well situated, surrounded by the River Wear. The land around consists of woods, fields, and meadows, giving a pleasing prospect. The best view is from the tower of the cathedral. Close to the church is the castle of the bishop, who, with the cathedral chapter, has all the revenues from this province. To the question, what trade is carried on in the city, the answer is law and gospel. But the great majority of the population consists of lawyers and priests. Those who do not enjoy any of the ample profits regard these people as a trade. There are too many of them. Get the next one. So that railway viaduct really symbolises the transition to mining within the city and not just the property owners benefiting from the industry. And the great expression of unionism in the city is the construction of the first headquarters of the Durham Miners Association on North Road. And this splendid building still stands on North Road, and it was in use from 1875 to 1915. The architect was a man called Thomas Oliver, who was a Newcastle-based architect. Interestingly, a lot of Oliver's works are institutional buildings. He designed Presbyterian Church at Town Law, for example. He added schoolrooms to the Presbyterian Church, St George's in Sunderland, and he also built the Londonderry Institute at Seaham, which was the Literary and Scientific Institute for Londonderry's coal port at Seaham, and it's now part of the Durham Ancient Mine Workers Claims Association. As you can see on the slide, the first Durham Miners headquarters had 3 of the statues that now stand at Redfields on the facade of the building. They stood in those 3 niches on the first floor. And then there's a door to the right of those 3 statues, which has the date 1874 over that door. And I slightly wonder if that door had a similar use at first floor level to the balcony on the Royal County Hotel in the games. It's quite striking that there is that first floor door there. On the ground floor door, next time you walk on North Road, you can see that it says 1993, because the ground floor was restored in 1993. And unfortunately, the building today is quite dilapidated, it's not in use. And I just want to highlight the fact that given that Redfields has had such a terrific investment of money through the lottery project, it would be wonderful to see this heritage asset in the city better appreciated and indeed better understood by people. And we were very pleased to draw attention to it in the gallery. Go to the next one. So this is Redfields. This is the second headquarters for the Durham Miners Union, built in 1915 as the new hall. And there's the famous Pittman's Parliament and the main facade of the building. What I would like to draw attention to is the houses, Redfields villas, by the same architect, which H.D. Bradford was the architect. And he designed these very handsome, very generously proportioned semi-detached villas for the union leaders. And if we go on the slide, they're embellished with architectural detail. We've got stained glass windows on the staircase, we've got generous bay windows, like arts and crafts, detail perhaps. We've also got classical features of pilasters on the front and pedimented doorways. So all of this, as homes for the union leaders, really marks them out as equal to the owners, or perhaps also equal to the managerial class in the mines. And you can see on the right, there's Robert Young's painting of Philadelphia Row in County Durham from 1899. The painting is now finished. And it's a wonderful depiction of 18th, 19th century colliers housing. You can see the stone cottages, which have brick netties added on the back. And the long row extending down towards what was probably the Peggy bit, Margaret bit. That's stone on the ground floor and then raised in a darker stone to 2 stories. And if you go through Philadelphia Road today, that row of houses is still there. It's one of the best surviving rows of early style industrial housing in County Durham. But I wanted to move here because if you notice the bigger house, the manager's house, in the front of the picture, has a pedimented doorcase. And I've always been intrigued by the fact that Young chooses to show that pediment with one half broken off. But The point being that the union leaders' houses at Red Hills were on a par with the managerial class and indeed the whole premise of Red Hills architecturally was that the miners could negotiate with the owners on an equal basis. Next one. Sticking with houses, one of the main things Sandra and I want to do, guys, is to get across a sense of both sides of them. So that's why we start on the Cathedral and people walk along Bailey streets. And as we explain in the guide, this is where the lawyers have their houses and offices, as well as the co-owners and the clergy. And then the guide takes people around Red Hills and through the working class terraced streets. And we have these terrific drawings by Fran, who represented both the Bailey house of the property and the terraced house of the labour, and shows where the coal is. So in the property household, the coal goes into the cellar, and of course would be handled by servants. In the terraced house, for the labouring class, the coal went into the backyard, and the people of the house, not least the housewife, would handle the coal. And in terms of the interior of the house, coal generated huge amounts of labour in terms of cleaning, which would have been done primarily by the housewife in the terrace house, by servants in the property house. And final slide. We don't say anything about this image in the book. We actually came across it quite late. It's part of Michael Richardson's wonderful collection of postcards and photographs in his Charles H. archive. And it's this wonderful love token. A lad writes to his sweetheart, having made a handmade love token from Durham black diamond. We haven't researched what happened. Don't want to spoil the story. Anyway, that's the selection of images we thought we'd share with you. And we now invite comments, questions, and contributions.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Adrian, for a wonderful illuminated talk. We'll come to Dr. Banks in a minute, but let's solicit some questions. Anyone here would like to ask a question? Certainly, we've got a couple online. I saw the lady with glasses here. Right.
You just asked me about the diamond terrace, and it's got a big boss house to mine terrace. And when I came here in 1980, children were little, and I had to rescue them from falling down shafts because the 80 pits were there, and then the railway had across what was prior, pits was being prior to the railway. And our first wood place was made of pit props. So we propped the books. So right in 1980, we got a big sense of the oil, of the coal background. And there's a wagonway down there as well, which is now hard to find, but we used to just roam back and forth there. And I was also told that there was a tunnel under the river from those mines to the marketplace. I don't know whether you have any information.
No, I don't know what's information of a tunnel. But there might have been some sort of pipeline or something. We know that that area was near the gasworks was built there, I think in the 1820s. And it might have been something connected. It might have been something connected to that. And we also know that in the North Road Miners' Hall, you know, it's got a clock, dome and a clock. Well, apparently the citizens of Durham were asked if they would pay bills for gas to light the clock in the winter and at night, and they refused. So I'm sorry we don't know anything about the mystery tunnel, but maybe we'll try and see if we can find something out about it. And that's one of the things we'd like people to do actually, is that if you've got some things like bits of information like that can often lead, it's like being a detective, finding these things out, lead to things, or people who can tell us more, and people who are now listening remotely as well. If you want to get in touch with us, we'd really like to hear from you if you've got any further information for us.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Those were both very enjoyable presentations. I was taken by the photographs of the houses with the very round doorways which you showed. There are a lot of those doorways in Wooden Park. I don't know if you've ever been to Wooden Park. I think you need to spend an afternoon just walking around and photographing them all. That just is the only village in the Bishop Auckland constituency that has a lot of those doorways. And there are, for some reason that I don't understand, a phenomenal number of them.
Yeah, so what else generally you can go to get pockets of middle class housing. New Bottle Village is both Philadelphia Road and the Heritage Spring. That's got a lot of very handsome Georgian houses along Woodland Village. It's really the craftsmen, actually. Craftsmen tend to have a way of doing doors, and then they sort of roll them out to people as the houses decorate. So the pattern tends to reflect the different building craftsmen.
Thank you, Adrian, for just confirming where Philadelphia Road was. I thought, wait a second, I'll have a quick look on the internet whilst Adrian's speaking. So, other than hits in the US, both Durham, North Carolina, and Philadelphia, I found it on Rightmove. So, if you'd like a house there, it's about £50,000. Anyway, next question.
Sorry, I'm so far off.
Don't worry, I remind you.
Hi, great, thanks for really enjoyed that. We got the book last year and we've had a couple of goes around and so it's really fascinating. I particularly love touching that coal sea by the bridge. But I was wondering actually, maybe Adrian, this is maybe one for you, why after a pretty short period of time the miners all moved from what was a pretty grand building to another. What was the reason behind that?
Wasn't big enough.
Wasn't it?
It wasn't that. Not enough seats for the lodges. But apart from anything else, they must have the money to do it. So that would have been a big motivation, I think.
Well, they raised the money for both those buildings on a kind of subscription basis. So I think that the coal industry, the Durham coal industry, was pretty well at its most prosperous in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. So they were in a position to be able to do it. But they also didn't have enough offices, committee rooms, and the seats for all the delegates by that point.
Yeah, that said, I think North Road, Durham Mines Association, city centre location, I've just found a home for the Energy Institute.
No, yeah.
What's the question?
Just a comment, Sandra, I didn't find much about the North Road, particularly about how it came into existence, but it's quite a bit about my else, and why, as you said, it was too small.
Well, North Road was a new street.
Yeah.
It was, what was the date? It was mainly, it was before, it was in the middle of the 19th century, early to mid 19th century, that was turned into that main street. So it didn't really exist before, and we were trying to figure out the other day where, and it's called North Road, so we figure that it was the north, it was the road going north, the Great North Road, and then that used to go up, and we think it went up Tramelgate. And then when they built that new street,
The 19th century cut goes not only from under the viaduct, and then there's that cut, which I assume is 19th century all the way up to County Hall. That's all known as North Road.
Yeah, and that's known as North Road as well.
It would also been a commercial.
I think it was called King's. There was a street there, I think, before. It was called King Street, and there was a very famous pub at the bottom of it. And there was a slum as well. It was quite rowdy down there.
John, as I walk, I should say, as I walk over to John, please do fill in the full risk assessment before you go and vote beneath the overhang. I should have included that when I introduced the health and safety. John.
Thanks. I'd like to declare an interest to share the City of Durham to a junior partner in this venture, and delighted to hear more about it. I was particularly interested in the two sketches of the coal holes, because my gran lived in a very old terrace. This is in Cheshire, not around here. Outside that is the loft, but her coal went into the cellar, and it did in all the houses in that street, the bricks and bacon.
Yeah, my grand's cellar, similarly, and it used to scare me to death. There's this dark hole within the house. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, the terrace house we live in has also got, was a working class house, and it's also got a cellar because it had no rear entrance anyway. But there was a pattern for those houses, that the terrace house with the yard, the netting, and then and in fact, where we took that from, where it is in the guide, that particular coal hole, there is also, Jan noticed the other day, a bricked up kind of thing like that, which would have been to get in the netting, to get the soil away when the night soil people came as well. So the alleys, the back alleys were really functional. And I don't know if your house had access back to the rear. No, well, yeah, that's I think that is right. But an interesting thing about when doing a guide, I was thinking about this, it's a very particular kind of text. So you have to think very hard, you have to figure out how to give people directions, right directions, and things like that. But one thing I realised at the end of it, and after it had been published, was that those coal hole hatches are disappearing from the back streets of Durham, the main street houses, and they just brick them up and so on. And I thought, well, that'd be awful if that one was bricked up, because we've got the picture, we've got the direction, how to get there. What are people going to say? Where is it? It's not there anymore. So that meant having to find who owned the house, which of course turned out into quite a task. And it turns out it's owned by absentee landlord company that lets the students.
So no chance it will ever be improved.
Somebody in this organisation that I started emailing with, and then I sent her a copy of the book, and then I begged completed with her, and they painted it because it was all crumbling. It was like in quite bad condition, and they since painted it. And I don't know how we can now ensure that it is actually fully preserved. But anyway, they're aware that they're
Painted it then and built it for it.
The other thing about those doorway drawings is that the Sandra's idea to have drawings rather than photographs, and that would be more evocative. And that for that particular thing, it ties those two things together in the book.
Yeah.
So, an interesting decision.
Yeah. Have you got any chat?
Any more? But there aren't now, just to. Oh, here we go. So it's working for some.
Oh, something's atrocious.
Any more questions from the audience here? Maggie? Oh, right, thank you.
Right on the positioning. Just checking, so when you talk to people at council who are in charge of environment conservation, there's all sorts of stuff they can eventually do in terms of creating conservation areas and things like that? I don't know whether they do.
No, I it did enter my head that I could try and get a preservation order put on this Polhack for the sake of the book and keep the book truthful. But I thought that might be a step too far. So first of all, found the people that now family owners, it might be actually useful to think about them. Thank you, Maggie.
Okay, are we? Oh, one more, please. Lynn.
So a question for Adrian. In terms of building up the housing for workers, was that the responsibility of the kids? And if it was, did you have groupings, group houses, with the rubbish ones, or how did it work?
So it does vary. A lot of bits built the housing. A lot of the housing in the 19th century was purely religious and contributed to severe health problems among my community. Even though people were doing that as the house, there often wasn't proper sanitation. There's also speculative building. I can imagine quite a lot of the terrace housing in Durham and those speculative builders by the late 19th century. But the origins would be building the colliers housing for each pit. And what's interesting is that the brick earth in Durham occurs next to the columns. So when you sink a pit, you get materials like bricks.
And there were brickworks amongst as well as coking ovens. There was nearly always brickworks by the large collieries and sometimes tile works as well. So they would use those materials to build miners' houses. And if they were mentioning the bond they signed, then they had that job for the year, and they also had their house for a year. And of course, if anything happened, if the man of the house died in an accident or something, then that family had nowhere to live because they were tied houses.
Sandra was painting not only clay and coal, but also iron was one as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, there are still tin houses in Newfield, and there were tin houses till quite recently in Eltham, which is ironic because Eltham. So I don't know who was pushing those up.
I don't know specifically. I mean, what we have lost is a lot of the very crudely constructed foundations. And if you go back there earlier, sod cottages on bed steps down at the edge of the office now. That's early 19th century people living in dugout habitations with sod cover. So we've lost all of that. So that
I don't think Boston is a very good word.
Well, spot. Yeah.
Thank you. For the time being, at least, we've exhausted the questions. Of course, many more will be answered if you care to buy a copy of the book. It just leads me to, every time I listen to this parent talk, I learn more and more, and the delivery is just great. So, fantastic double act, lovely talk, and I'll wait for the album to come out. Sandra, thank you very much.